Hello and welcome to today's episode of Trail Impressions. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the differences of hiking in America compared to hiking in the Nordic countries. So today I've taken you with me to this local trail pretty close to the place where I grew up. And this is mid-November and today is quite chilly. It's about 6 degrees Celsius. Minus 6 degrees Celsius. Because it's the beginning of the winter, we are not yet so used to the cold, so even just 6 degrees feels relatively chilly. But I'm all bundled up and I have a hot drink with me. I'm going to walk to this little shelter and have my hot chocolate there and enjoy the view. As I talk about these differences, they are based on, well, mostly on my own experiences of hiking here in Finland, and I've done some hiking in Sweden, and then also I have hiked in America on the Appalachian Trail. So most of these observations are based on my own experiences, but I did also look online to see what internet had to say on this matter. So some of these are also things that I found online. Let's first talk about where you can camp when you go hiking out in nature. The Nordic countries have this core concept called right to roam, and that allows camping on public lands for a few nights at a time. You're pretty much allowed to camp anywhere, as long as it's not somebody's private yard. Of course, you can't go to their backyard or something like that, but in the lands that don't have crops growing on them, basically you're allowed to camp anywhere. But nature reserves, and especially the national parks, have their own rules. So in there, you're supposed to look up their own specific rules, but generally they have campsites that are already existing, and those you are allowed to camp at. And at least according to the internet, the US has more designated and regulated trails, and there's also more park rangers and visitor centers. And while I was hiking the Appalachian Trail, I definitely did notice that some of the national parks that the trail went through, there is definitely more park rangers, and some of them you need to have permissions or permits. And it is a little bit different. And I'd like to also add that the right to roam that the Nordic countries have, it does not just include camping, but it also includes foraging. So you are allowed to go and pick berries and mushrooms and pretty much any of the things that nature has. Then if we are talking about elevation and mountains and differences on that, I guess I should talk about the highest mountains in the Nordic countries, because our mountains are not as high as some of the ones in America. The Scandinavian mountains are mostly in Norway and Sweden. There are some at the north of Finland, but Finland doesn't technically have mountains at all. But the highest part of Norway is called Galdhøpiggen. I'm not sure if I pronounce it right, probably not. My Norwegian is a little bit rusty. That mountain is 2,469 meters, which is 8,100 feet tall. And the highest part of Sweden is a mountain called Kebnekaise, which is 2,096.8 meters and 6,879 feet high. And the highest part of Finland is called Halti, and that is actually on the border of Norway and Finland. The peak of Halti is in Norway actually, but the highest part of that within Finland is 1,324 meters, and in feet that is 4,344 feet. And the mountains in America, of course, are a lot taller than that. I have not hiked in the West Coast, so the only mountains that I've seen in America or hiked in America are the ones along the Appalachian Trail. And the highest part of the Appalachian Trail is, if I remember correctly, just above 2,000 meters. But there are a lot higher mountains than that in America. Of course, some of the mountains are so high that you actually need to worry about the elevation causing you like elevation sickness, and that's not a thing that would happen in the Nordic mountains. But yeah, so the mountains and the mountainous terrain is definitely different, especially even in the Nordics. If you don't go hiking all the way to the north, then there is not that much elevation gain. But of course, in America as well, there are many parts of the country where you can hike on more flat terrain. Then, of course, the nature is quite different, mainly because the Nordic countries are a lot more higher up in the north than most of America, except for Alaska. But when I was hiking on the Appalachian Trail, especially in the southern parts, I remember that there were times that I felt that the forest was almost jungly to my eyes, even though it's not a jungle, of course, but compared to the forests that I had gotten used to hiking at, it really felt so wild and lush and just very different. And we have a lot of pine trees, as you can even just see here, and spruce, and we have birch trees, and just so the trees are different and the kind of shrubbery is different mostly. And especially if you go to the north, like in the Lapland of Finland, Sweden and Norway, then you will find even more different terrain and nature than from here, because up in those fjälls there's hardly any trees growing, or the trees are very short and small. But I do remember that as I was hiking in Maine especially, there were some parts that I felt that reminded me of home. Like I remember in the 100-mile wilderness, I was on this bank of a lake, and I remember thinking that, yeah, this scenery and these plants and everything right here could pretty much be from Finland. Yeah, there are some similarities, of course, but a lot of differences as well, which of course makes it more interesting. Then if we will talk about the cultural differences, well, especially in Finland, we don't really do small talk at all, whereas in America, it's very common. I feel like Sweden and Norway do a bit more small talk than we do. Or I would still say that America is a lot more small talky than the Nordic countries. So when you're on trails and when you encounter other people, you probably will chat a bit more and have longer exchanges with just strangers and people that you meet than in the Nordics. Especially in Finland, you might not even say anything to the person that you're passing by. Usually we do say hi, or you might nod. You do acknowledge them, but not as often as in America. You will actually sort of stop and maybe exchange few words, ask them how they're doing and how the hike is going. So that is definitely different if you are from America and come to hike in the Nordics and people don't maybe stop and talk to you so much. It's not because they are rude. It's just because the way we are used to doing things in here. In Finland especially, we are quite used to having our own personal space, which is a bigger space than the ones that Americans have. But yeah, so the cultural differences of the Nordics and of America should really be its own video altogether, but I'll leave that for someone else to make. But I just wanted to mention it in this video. But I gotta say that I did like the American way. It made me feel very welcome, and after the exchanges that I had, the little chats that I had with locals on the trail that I encountered, I just felt more happy. So for me, I did like the American way as well, but I also do like our way, because that's just the way I've gotten used to operating. There's another thing that I thought that I would briefly mention, which is the trail names, but that is in America mostly on the long distance trail. So if you just go for a normal distance hike in America, I don't think the trail name thing is a thing that you will encounter. But on the long distance trails, there is this culture of trail names, and you will probably be given a trail name by the people that you hike with and the people that you run into. And that is mostly not a thing in the Nordics. We do have some longer distance hikes in here as well, but at least I'm not aware that the trail names is a thing that is happening in here. But if you have been hiking in the Nordics and you have found that is a thing, then please let me know. I'm gonna show you this beautiful lake. Hold on. Another thing that is a little bit different that I've noticed is the amount of water, the amount of lakes and ponds. So the Nordic countries have a lot more lakes than America, and that is a result of glacial erosion. And these lakes cover a kind of big percentage of the landmass of the Nordic countries, and that makes the Nordic countries really water rich. And so when you hike out here, it's more probable that you will see a lake. And I feel like a lot of our campsites are also by a lake. It's very easy to go for a swim at the end of the day after you've set up your camp. I definitely noticed the difference, and especially when I was hiking in the southern parts, there was not at all as much water that I was used to in here, or the waters were more creeks and rivers running down the mountains. But in Maine, there definitely was more water. There was beautiful lakes and beautiful ponds, so that felt more like hiking in the Nordics, in my opinion. Okay, I'm approaching this little shelter now, and I'm gonna stop there and we'll chat a little bit more, for example, about the differences of the shelters. This adorable little shelter was actually built by a local man that lives here. He's also built a beautiful remote cabin by this lake around here, and this is on a beautiful spot. It's very small. You don't fit more than 2 people here. There's a little fire ring, but it has not been used for a while. But the view is pretty nice. Well, let's talk a little bit about the shelters. So the shelters in the Nordic countries, or at least in Finland, do look a lot like this. As well as in America, they do often have a fire ring, maybe some benches to sit on, usually a privy close by, and then also tent sites as well. But the structure and the look of them is a little bit different. At least if I compare the ones that I saw on the Appalachian Trail to the ones that I've encountered while hiking in Finland and Sweden. And then we do also have this concept of autiotupa, which is kind of like a wilderness hut. But I think America also has similar things, though I do imagine that the way they look is a little bit different, of course. But one thing that is different on the shelters is that we don't have bear box or bear cables in the Nordics, but in America you quite often have them. And mainly that's because we don't have as many bears, or the bears are not as big of a problem in here. So in Nordic countries we have only brown bears, except for polar bears, but they are all the way up in Norway, and I don't think there's any hiking close to where polar bears live. And the brown bears are usually kind of shy and they don't approach humans, except of course if you get in between a mother and a cub, then you might be in trouble. But America has black bears and brown bears and polar bears, and the grizzly bears are apparently a subspecies of brown bears. Yeah, and on the trails in America, the bears definitely seem to be more of a problem, and they might come and try to steal your food. So it's very important to always hang your food or put it in a bear box, or if you have a bear canister, and that way you can try and keep it safe and also keep the bears from getting too accustomed to being close to humans. But in the Nordics, that's another thing that we are encouraged to do, and I have never really heard that that would be a problem in here. So yeah, the bear boxes and the bear cables are a thing that you will probably encounter if you're hiking in America, and not so much if you're hiking in the Nordics. And since I'm drinking of my kuksa here, I thought I would tell you a little bit more about this. So kuksa is a type of a drinking cup, and traditionally they were made by the Sami people, which are the indigenous people in northern Scandinavia and Finland. And it's often made from carved birch burl. But you can also just make it of birch, but if you make it from the burl, it's more stronger. And they are hand carved, and they dry them to prevent the wood from cracking. And apparently the birch burl kuksas will last longer than the plain birch ones. And they have originally been used widely in the Arctic areas as a personal drinking cup. And if you have a well-made one, it would last you a lifetime. Usually you don't wash them, you just rinse them with clean water and dry with a cloth after using, because if you use detergents, they might damage the kuksa. So in Finland we call them kuksa, and in Sweden they're called kosa, and in the Sami language they are called guksi. They're very cute and pretty lightweight and very durable and ecological, so they are good to have as a cup when you go out hiking and camping. I have a couple more things, a couple more points that I wanted to discuss about, and one of them is the animals that you might encounter when you're hiking. So in the Nordics, especially in the north part, we have reindeer, but then we also have moose, and we have deer, of course. We do have foxes and some lynx, but reindeer is definitely not an animal that you would encounter while hiking in America. Whereas in America you might encounter bison or mountain lions or things like that that you would not run into while hiking in the Nordics. On the Appalachian Trail I saw things like turtles, which in here we don't have turtles out in the nature, and also rattlesnakes, and there are some other venomous snakes as well. But in the Nordics we only have one type of venomous snake, which is the viper. So the snakes are definitely different. We do have bunnies and squirrels, but then in America you also have like groundhogs and marmots and chipmunks that we don't have here. So I feel like a lot of the bigger and smaller animals could be different. Also the birds are very different. I feel like most of the birds did not look or sound same as the ones that I'm used to seeing and hearing while hiking here. And I also feel like the birds in America are bigger, especially the vultures. I feel like I'm not used to seeing as big birds flying out in here. That's not to say we don't have big birds, but it's just not as common to see them when out hiking. And then trail snacks. So I guess mostly we do have the same idea of snacks, but of course the brands are different and some of the ingredients are probably different, but I guess the basics is the same. Like you can have nuts and different types of bars, and you have those backpacking meals where you just add hot water and that makes it into a whole meal. But definitely if you're not used to the different brands, when you first go out to a grocery store to try to look for snacks to take with you, it might take a while to find the ones that you want. And I would be so bold as to say that I feel like the snacks in the Nordics are maybe a little bit more healthy. Though you can find healthy snacks and things in America as well, but it might not be so easy, or they might not be so readily available. Okay, a few more things left. So one is winter hiking versus summer hiking. So of course in America you also have these regions that have winter and snow, but in many of the places in America, if you go hiking during winter, you probably won't have snow, or at least a lot of snow, and also it's not as cold. But if you go hiking in the Nordics during winter, you can have lots and lots of snow, and it can be very cold, and you might need to use different gear, the gear that is made for winter hiking. But I mean, if you sleep in one of those wilderness huts, then you don't necessarily need winter gear as much. So it's definitely doable. You can go out hiking in the winter without having a four-season tent and very warm sleeping pad and sleeping bag and all that. But in that case, you just need to make sure that you will be able to sleep in a wilderness hut or some other warm enough spot. Also, the amount of sunlight is different, because in the Nordic countries in the winter, even though now you can see beautiful sunshine, the sun does not stay up very long. So the days are very short, especially in the middle of winter. And if you go all the way to the north, the sun doesn't actually come up above the horizon at all for several months. So the amount of sunlight that you have to hike is a lot less than you would have in America. But then if you go hiking in the summer, on the other hand, the amount of sunlight varies by latitude, but it ranges from about 17 to 19 hours of daylight in the capital cities to 24 hours of continuous sunlight north of the Arctic Circle. And this phenomenon is known as the midnight sun. So that is quite different from hiking in America in the summer, where generally the amount of sunlight does not vary so much in the winter or in the summer. Well, this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for coming along. I hope you have enjoyed the talk and the nature, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye!